Geologists know lots about earthquakes now, but surprisingly, even after decades of research, we still can't predict exactly when and where they'll happen. That's because the build-up of pressure deep inside the Earth is so slow and usually gives few warning signs that we can measure. But for some geologists, prediction remains the holy grail. And over in Turkey, there's one fault where we think we can make an earthquake forecast. We think we know exactly where the next earthquake will strike, and that's an exciting breakthrough. The only trouble is, we don't know when. Here in Turkey, there's a fault line that slices through the country for 1,500 kilometres. It's one of the most treacherous faults on the planet. Millions of people live along its path. It's known as the North Anatolian Fault. Unlike most other faults, the North Anatolian Fault runs in a relatively straight, simple line, and that means it may be easier here for scientists to calculate where the next earthquake will happen. That's because scientists now know that after an earthquake, the stress from that one earthquake travels further down the same fault line and builds up in a new location along the fault. So in theory, if you can pinpoint where the stress has gone to after one earthquake, you know where the next earthquake will strike. The key is to work out where the stress from the last earthquake has travelled to. And one scientist, Jeffrey King, has been developing a computer model that can do just that. King and his team of scientists plot where all the aftershocks happen after a major earthquake. That tells you the broad areas where the stress is transferred to. But to pinpoint more precisely where the next earthquake might strike, this model analyses some key geological data about previous earthquakes. For instance, how deep underground the rupture was, the nature of the rocks in the area, and how much the fault had slipped. The calculations of where the stress had gone show up in red. To see if their model worked, in the 1990s, this team focused their attention on Turkey and fed all the geological data from the North Anatolian Fault into their computer model. Using this model, they then calculated exactly where earthquakes should happen along this particular fault line, according to how stress gets transferred. And they came up with 7 locations where they believed that earthquakes would happen, one after another, in a sequence running east to west. And then they compared these predictions with what had happened in the past. It was uncanny. They discovered that those 7 sites, running from east to west, were almost exactly where earthquakes had actually occurred, from 1939 to 1967. The model worked. It was a triumph. The model confirmed that the stress generated in one earthquake was being transferred west along the fault line. The earthquakes seemed to be triggering each other like a set of falling dominoes. So the question was, where did the model predict that the next quake would happen? In 1998, the team fed all the necessary equations into their computer and calculated where the stress would travel next along the North Anatolian Fault. The area that showed up red was the Bay of Izmit, home to 500,000 people. The scientists couldn't say when, but they were sure that an earthquake would strike Izmit. Newspapers and journals printed this remarkable news, but surprisingly, the warning barely registered, and life for the people of Izmit continued as normal. And then, just 1 year after they'd made their prediction, in August 1999, the scientists' forecast came true. earthquake, measuring 7.4 in magnitude, lasted just 45 seconds. But that was enough to destroy much of the city and claim the lives of 25,000 people. But Izmit is not the end of the story. Everyone knows there will be another earthquake along this fault. Where next? Well, using the data from the Izmit quake, scientists have now calculated where the stress has transferred to along the fault line. The area they've pinpointed as the next earthquake site will be an area west of Izmit. It includes one of the greatest cities in the world, Istanbul. Scientists are sure that the earthquake that hits Istanbul will be as big or bigger than the one that hit Izmit. They're certain it will come, they just can't say when. More than 10 million people live in Istanbul. It contains some of the world's most treasured buildings. The scale of the catastrophe, when it happens, will be almost unimaginable. Being able to accurately forecast where an earthquake will happen is a major breakthrough. But even if we could take it a step further and predict the exact time and place, how can you evacuate a city of 10 million people in just a few days? It would be practically impossible.